As we enter this next chapter, we return to Paya Lebar Airport not simply as a place of memory, but as a site of continuing national meaning. What stands before us is more than aviation heritage. It is a historic airfield whose runway, control tower, hangars, taxiways, and operational layout still reflects Singapore's long tradition of planning, discipline, readiness, and strategic foresight. In this episode, Le Premier Base presents a wider public case for understanding Paya Lebar in its full significance. Under total defense, its importance lies in war reserve capability, the principle that a nation must preserve credible strategic options before crisis, not after. Under safety, its lessons also extend into the language of command and control. In the civilian and commercial aviation world, this is often understood through C3I: command, control, communications, and intelligence. It refers to the disciplined coordination of people, procedures, information, and decision-making needed to keep complex air operations safe, lawful, and reliable. In the military context, this broadens into C4 ISR: command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. This does not require the disclosure of sensitive operations. For public understanding, it simply means that modern national readiness depends not only on aircraft and runways, but on the ability to see clearly, communicate accurately, decide lawfully, and act in time. In that sense, aviation safety is never just technical. It is also procedural, organizational, and ethical, grounded in standard operating procedures, lawful conduct, trained judgment, and institutional discipline. Under human governance, the future relevance of this site may also be understood through the GEN5AI, Layer 6, Control Tower Architecture. In today's era of AI, 5G, XR, simulation, and robotics, many citizens are still learning how advanced systems are structured. One useful public reference comes from Jensen Huang, founder and CEO of NVIDIA, who has recently described AI through a widely discussed 5-layer stack framework. NVIDIA's own materials present that 5-layer model as a way of understanding how modern AI systems are built from infrastructure upward into applications. Le Premier Base adopts that broad educational logic and then extends it further. It proposes a Gen 5 AI Layer 6 above the 5-layer AI stack, a safety and human governance layer that preserves accountable human judgment over increasingly powerful digital systems. It asks a simple but vital question. Once machines can process more data, simulate more scenarios, and assist more decisions, who remains responsible? The answer must remain the human being. Not human judgment removed by technology, but human judgment strengthened by technology. As set out through the National White Paper and Addenda series, this Gen 5 extension has already been notified across the relevant national policy chain, including PMO-linked stakeholders, as part of the broader framework for governance, education, national resilience, and future international intellectual property positioning. And through Gen 5 flight simulation, AI, 5G, XR, and robotics, this heritage is no longer static. It becomes a platform for lifelong learning, experiential national education, and intergenerational understanding, helping the public appreciate aviation, resilience, governance, and national continuity in ways conventional classroom teaching alone may not easily achieve. This is not merely about remembrance or redevelopment preference. It is about whether institutions entrusted with planning, defense, and national stewardship are prepared to recognize an existential asset before it is diluted, fragmented, or lost. Before we proceed, it is worth pausing to place this episode in its wider context. This presentation is part of a continuing series, a series that has gradually built, episode by episode, a broader public understanding of Singapore's aviation heritage and the enduring significance of Paya Lebar Airport. In the earlier chapters, we introduced the case for reimagining Paya Lebar as living aviation heritage. We traced more than a century of Singapore's aviation development, and we examined why Paya Lebar continues to matter in terms of total defense, safety, human governance, national resilience, and lifelong learning. This continuity matters because the story of Paya Lebar cannot be understood through a single image, a single runway, or a single argument alone. It must be understood as part of a larger national journey, a journey involving aviation progress, institutional discipline, strategic foresight, and the steady building of public trust. That is why viewers are encouraged to watch the full sequence of episodes at their own pace and in their own time. For together they form part of a wider framework of national education, total defense, safety awareness, lifelong learning, and human governance. In this episode, we now move into another dimension of that same story. Not only how Paya Lebar functioned as an airport, but how it also served in visible and symbolic ways as a gateway through which diplomacy, leadership, and international confidence passed. In that sense, Episode 4 is not a departure from the earlier episodes. It is their continuation, a further layer of understanding, and an invitation to see Paya Lebar Airport more fully, not merely as infrastructure, but as part of Singapore's national meaning. To understand the significance of the visits that follow, we must first understand why they mattered. For a young Singapore, diplomatic arrivals at Paya Lebar Airport were never merely ceremonial occasions. They were moments in which national leadership, international confidence, and professional aviation standards came visibly together. When heads of state, prime ministers, presidents, and senior dignitaries arrived at Paya Lebar, their presence was not coincidental. It reflected trust in the airport, trust in the systems supporting it, and trust in Singapore's growing ability to receive the world with order, discipline, and competence. These occasions therefore carried a significance beyond protocol alone. They helped signal that Singapore was emerging not only as a connected city, but as a credible and dependable state. And behind each arrival stood something equally important, though less visible: the professional foundations of aviation. The air traffic control discipline, the ground handling standards, the timing, coordination, safety oversight, and operational precision required to receive high-level visitors properly and without error. In that sense, each dignitary visit also affirms something about the people and systems behind the scenes. Not only the leaders who stepped off the aircraft, but the controllers, planners, aviation staff, and institutions that made such movements possible. This is why these visits should not be seen simply as isolated archival moments. They were also indicators of a nation's steadily building capability, indicators of confidence in Singapore's airport infrastructure and professional standards, and indicators that Paya Lebar Airport had become part of the larger architecture of national identity, diplomacy, and statecraft. For the public today, this is the deeper point. These moments were not only about who arrived, they were also about what Singapore was becoming. A nation learning to combine leadership, aviation discipline, and international engagement in ways that would shape its reputation for decades to come. That is the context in which the following visits should now be understood. In November 1963, Paya Lebar Airport received one of the earliest royal arrivals in this sequence. The Yang di Pertuan Agong of Malaysia, Tuanku Syed Putra, and the Raja Permaisuri Agong arrived in Singapore on the 11th of November, where they were received at Paya Lebar Airport by Yang di Pertuan Negara Yusof bin Ishak and Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. The occasion was marked with full ceremonial dignity, including a 21-gun salute, underscoring the importance of protocol, regional relationship, and state representation in that early period. For a young Singapore, such an arrival carried significance beyond ceremony alone. It reflected the importance of protocol, regional relationships, and the visible dignity of state reception. It also showed that Paya Lebar Airport was already functioning as more than a transport facility. It was a national point of arrival, a place where leadership, diplomacy, and public representation met the operational discipline of aviation. The images from this visit remind us that airports are not only gateways for passengers and aircraft, they are also gateways of symbolism. They shape first impressions, they project order, and they reveal how a nation presents itself to visiting leaders and to the wider world. In this early royal arrival, we see Paya Lebar beginning to assume that role with clarity and confidence. It was already becoming part of the ceremonial and diplomatic landscape of Singapore. In September 1967, Paya Lebar Airport received another significant arrival in Singapore's growing diplomatic and aviation history. Japanese Prime Minister Eisaku Sato arrived at Paya Lebar Airport on the 25th of September, where he was received by Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. Also present in the arrival sequence was Mrs. Hiroko Sato, adding to the visible dignity of the occasion. For a young Singapore, this was not a routine ceremonial moment. It reflected the growing importance of Singapore's relationship with Japan. It also reflected the confidence that visiting governments placed in Singapore's ability to receive senior leaders with order, discipline, and proper protocol. At one level, this was a diplomatic event, but at another, it was also an aviation event. For arrivals of this nature depended on far more than the formal handshake on the tarmac. They depended on timing, on secure handling, on protocol, and on the smooth coordination of aircraft movement, ground operations, reception planning, and public representation. In that sense, every senior arrival at Paya Lebar also affirms something about the airport itself. It affirmed the professionalism of its systems, the reliability of its operations, and the growing confidence that Singapore could host important international visitors with steadiness and competence. This image therefore records more than a visit by the Prime Minister of Japan. It records a stage in Singapore's emergence as a dependable and increasingly connected Asian state. And it reminds us that Paya Lebar Airport was already becoming part of the practical architecture through which that confidence was received, expressed, and remembered. In May 1971, Paya Lebar Airport received a visit of a different but equally significant kind. Not the arrival of a foreign dignitary, but the presence of Singapore's own head of state, President Dr. Benjamin Henry Sheares, at Paya Lebar Airport on the 27th of May, 1971. This moment carries a special place in the story of Paya Lebar. For when a president visits an airport, and in particular its control tower precinct, the significance extends beyond ceremony. It reflects recognition that this is not merely a transport facility, but a place of national importance, a place where order, oversight, and responsibility are exercised in real time. In any airport, the control tower holds a special meaning. It is the point from which movement is seen, sequenced, authorized, and safeguarded. It represents coordination. It represents vigilance. And above all, it represents disciplined human judgment. That judgment is what keeps a complex airfield safe, lawful, and trusted. That is why this image of President Shears at Paya Lebar resonates so powerfully today. It reminds us that aviation leadership is not expressed only through aircraft, ceremonies, or public visibility. It is also expressed in the quieter centers of control, in places where responsibility, awareness, and trust must come together without failure. For Singapore in the early 1970s, this was especially meaningful. The nation was still strengthening its institutions, building public confidence, and defining the standards by which its systems would be trusted. And here, at one of its most important gateways, the President's presence affirmed the value of professionalism, operational discipline, and calm institutional oversight. In that sense, this was not only a presidential visit, it was also a recognition of aviation governance. And viewed from today's perspective, it offers an even deeper continuity. For the control tower remains one of the clearest symbols of how technology, safety, and human judgment must always work together. That principle remains relevant in every era. It was true in the age of radar, radio, and runway control. And it remains true today in the age of simulation, artificial intelligence, robotics, and advanced digital systems. In this image, therefore, we do not see only a historical visit. We also see an enduring national idea that control without judgment is insufficient, that technology without responsibility is incomplete, and that safe, trusted systems must always remain anchored in human governance. In June 1972, Paya Lebar Airport became the setting for one of the most striking aviation moments of its era. The aircraft before us was Concorde 002, the British-French supersonic prototype that had already captured global attention as a symbol of speed, technological ambition, and the future of civil aviation. Its presence at Paya Lebar Airport was significant on many levels. For Concorde was never just another aircraft. It represented a frontier of engineering confidence, a frontier of international prestige, and a frontier of what civil aviation believed it might soon become. For Singapore, the arrival of Concorde at Paya Lebar showed something important. It showed that this airport was not operating at the margins of the jet age. It was participating in its front line. It was a place where advanced aviation developments could be received, examined, and publicly presented. And that mattered, because airports do not host such aircraft by accident. They do so because they possess operational credibility. They do so because they are trusted. And they do so because the systems on the ground are considered capable of handling extraordinary machines with safety, discipline, and professionalism. In that sense, Concorde's presence at Paya Lebar was not merely a technological spectacle. It was also a mark of confidence. Confidence in Singapore, confidence in its airport, and confidence in the professional aviation standards that made such a visit possible. For the public at the time, Concorde represented wonder, but for the nation, it also represented something deeper. It reflected Singapore's place within a world that was moving rapidly toward greater speed, connectivity, and technological transformation. And here at Paya Lebar Airport, that future briefly became visible on Singapore soil. This is why the image still carries power today. It reminds us that Paya Lebar was not only a gateway for dignitaries and state visits, it was also a place where the future of aviation itself could be encountered. A place where global innovation touched down, and a place where Singapore, even then, was already positioning itself within the larger story of modern aviation. In June 1972, the significance of Concorde's presence at Paya Lebar Airport deepened still further. For here, we see not only the aircraft itself, but Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew examining the Concorde prototype, a moment that brought together national leadership, aviation modernity, and Singapore's outward-looking sense of purpose. This was more than a photograph beside a remarkable machine. It was a meeting point between leadership and the future. For Concorde was not simply an airliner, it was a symbol of speed, of engineering ambition, of international collaboration, and of the confidence with which the aviation world imagined the decades ahead. In standing before that aircraft at Paya Lebar Airport, Lee Kuan Yew was not merely observing an aviation novelty. He was engaging, in a very visible way, with the frontier of civil aviation. That image matters because it reflects something larger about Singapore in that era. A leadership deeply attentive to infrastructure, to technology, to systems, and to the practical forces that would shape the nation's place in the modern world. It also reflects something important about Paya Lebar itself, that this airport was not merely handling routine operations. It was serving as a place where world-class aviation developments could be received, assessed, and understood at the highest national level. In that sense, this moment was not only about Concorde, it was also about Singapore's posture, a posture of curiosity, a posture of preparedness, and a posture of disciplined engagement with innovation. For the public, this image still speaks powerfully today. It reminds us that the significance of Paya Lebar Airport lay not only in diplomacy, protocol, or daily operations. It also lay in its connection to modernity, technological aspiration, and national confidence. And in this encounter between Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew and the Concorde prototype, the runway at Paya Lebar became more than an arrival point. It became a place where Singapore stood face to face with the future of aviation. In August 1974, Paya Lebar Airport received another arrival of clear regional significance. President Suharto of Indonesia and Mrs. Tien Suharto arrived in Singapore for a 3-day state visit, where they were received at Paya Lebar Airport by Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew and Mrs. Lee, with President Dr. Benjamin Henry Sheares and Mrs. Benjamin Henry Sheares also present in the welcoming sequence. This was an important moment, for Indonesia was and remains one of Singapore's most important neighbors, and visits at this level reflected more than courtesy alone. They reflected trust, they reflected regional engagement, and they reflected the careful management of bilateral relations in a part of the world where stability, confidence, and leadership mattered greatly. At Paya Lebar Airport, those diplomatic meanings were expressed not only through speeches or meetings, but through arrival, welcome, and ceremony. Through the aircraft on the tarmac, through the receiving line, and through the calm precision with which such occasions were conducted. In that sense, this was not only a state visit, it was also a demonstration of institutional confidence. Confidence in Singapore's ability to receive a visiting head of state with professionalism, dignity, and composure. And confidence in the airport system itself, in its timing, protocol, operational discipline, and visible readiness. The presence of Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew and Mrs. Lee in the arrival sequence adds further weight to the image. It reminds us that Paya Lebar Airport was not simply a backdrop. It was part of the living stage on which Singapore's regional relationships were made visible. For the public today, this image still carries meaning. It shows that Paya Lebar Airport was never merely a place of transit. It was also a place where diplomacy was enacted, a place where national representation met aviation discipline, and a place where Singapore engaged its region with steadiness, order, and respect. In September 1974, Paya Lebar Airport received another arrival of unmistakable international stature. In September 1974, Paya Lebar Airport received another arrival of unmistakable international stature. His Imperial Majesty Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi of Iran arrived in Singapore for a 3-day official visit, received through the ceremonial setting of Paya Lebar Airport. Related images from the arrival sequence also show Empress Farah and President Dr. Benjamin Henry Shears, reinforcing the dignity, protocol, and state significance of the occasion. This moment is significant not only because of who arrived, but because of what the arrival represented. This moment is significant not only because of who arrived, but because of what the arrival represented. It showed that Paya Lebar was functioning as a formal gateway through which Singapore welcomed leaders of global standing with the dignity, precision, and protocol such occasions required. In that sense, the airport was not merely supporting travel, it was supporting statecraft. It was providing the physical setting in which diplomacy could be conducted visibly, confidently, and with ceremonial order. The red carpet, the receiving line, the timing of movement, and the orchestration of the arrival all depended on more than symbolism. They depended on disciplined aviation handling, ground coordination, and the professionalism of the airport system itself. For the public today, this image reminds us that Paya Lebar Airport was a place where Singapore met the world at a high level, not only through commerce and connectivity, but through protocol, representation, and international presence. And in receiving leaders such as the Shah of Iran, the airport helped project an image of Singapore as orderly, capable, and fully at ease in the responsibilities of international engagement. In February 1978, Paya Lebar Airport once again served as the formal gateway for an important regional leader. Thai Prime Minister General Kriang Sak Chomanan arrived at Paya Lebar Airport for a 3-day official visit to Singapore. The arrival sequence is especially revealing. It shows not only the visiting Prime Minister, but also Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, Mrs. Lee, and the Chief of Protocol, all part of the carefully ordered reception that such a visit required. This matters because diplomacy at this level is never improvised. It depends on ceremony, it depends on timing, and it depends on the disciplined coordination of aviation, protocol, security, and state representation. At Paya Lebar Airport, those elements came together in a visible and orderly form. This was therefore more than an arrival photograph. It was an image of Singapore's capacity to receive regional leadership with professionalism, confidence, and composure. For the public today, that is one of the enduring lessons of these archival moments. They show how an airport can serve not only the movement of aircraft, but the movement of relationships. And in that role, Paya Lebar Airport became part of the practical setting through which Singapore engaged its region with steadiness and respect. In November 1978, Paya Lebar Airport became the point of arrival for one of the most consequential diplomatic visits in this sequence. China's senior vice premier, Deng Xiaoping, arrived in Singapore on the 12th of November for a 3-day visit, where he was welcomed at Paya Lebar Airport by Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew and senior cabinet colleagues, including Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Goh Keng Swee. At the time, this was already an important state occasion, but viewed in retrospect, its significance became even greater. For Deng's visit is now widely understood as one of the early moments that helped shape the later course of Singapore-China relations, well before diplomatic ties were formally established in 1990. That is why this image matters. It captures more than a ceremonial arrival. It records a meeting point between two national trajectories. One, a young but rapidly developing Singapore. The other, a China on the threshold of historic transformation. And once again, the setting was Paya Lebar Airport, a place where leadership, aviation discipline, and international significance intersected. The airport's role in such a moment should not be underestimated. For before the meetings, the discussions, and the later historical consequences, there was the arrival itself, the reception, the protocol, the first visual expression of welcome and state confidence. For the public today, this image reminds us that airports can become part of history not only through aircraft, but through the leaders and decisions that pass through them. And in the case of Deng Xiaoping's visit, Paya Lebar Airport formed the threshold of an encounter whose significance would reach far beyond its own time. In May 1979, Paya Lebar Airport received yet another senior international visitor. Vice President of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, arrived by special flight at Paya Lebar Airport for an official visit to Singapore, where he was received and escorted on arrival by Foreign Minister S. Rajaratnam. By this stage in the chronology, the broader pattern is clear. Paya Lebar Airport had become more than an aviation facility. It had become a recognized gateway through which Singapore received leaders of regional and international importance. Each such arrival reflected more than protocol. It reflected continuity. Continuity in operational discipline, continuity in ceremonial readiness, and continuity in the confidence placed in Singapore's airport systems and public institutions. In that sense, this image records more than the arrival of a visiting vice president. It also records the sustained role of Paya Lebar Airport in Singapore's external engagement, a role in which aircraft movement, state protocol, and national representation were brought together in one visible setting. For the public today, this matters because it completes the larger diplomatic picture. Across the 1960s and 70s, Paya Lebar was repeatedly called upon to receive leaders, dignitaries, and symbols of international significance. And in doing so, it quietly became part of the architecture through which Singapore's confidence, reliability, and international presence were projected. This is why the airport's significance cannot be measured by aviation operations alone. It must also be understood through the moments of statecraft that pass through it. And with that, the sequence now approaches a turning point, for soon the national role of Paya Lebar itself would begin to change. By 1981, the story of Paya Lebar Airport was entering a new chapter. With the opening of Changi Airport as Singapore's principal civil gateway, Paya Lebar's role began to change. It was no longer to serve primarily as the nation's international passenger airport. Instead, it entered a new phase of national service as Paya Lebar Air Base under the Republic of Singapore Air Force. This transition was significant, for it reminds us that the value of Paya Lebar did not disappear with the end of one function. It evolved. What had long served diplomacy, connectivity, and international arrival would now serve a different dimension of national need, one rooted in defense, readiness, and operational air power. In that sense, Paya Lebar did not fade from national relevance. It remained part of Singapore's strategic landscape, only now under a different mission. For the public, this is an important point. Airfields of enduring value are not always defined by a single role across time. They may serve the nation in different ways at different moments. And Paya Lebar is one of the clearest examples of that continuity. First as a modern international airport of the jet age, then as a site of diplomatic arrivals, state visits, and national confidence. And thereafter as an airbase linked to a new chapter of Singapore's security and defense story. This is why Paya Lebar should be understood not as a place with one fixed identity, but as a national asset whose meaning has deepened across successive eras. And it is precisely that layered continuity which gives the site its lasting significance today. As this chapter draws closer to its conclusion, it is important to remember that the significance of Paya Lebar Airport was never defined only by state visits, diplomatic arrivals, or national transition. It was also defined by people, by those who worked there, by those who learned there, by those who served there, and by those whose daily routines, responsibilities, and shared experiences gave life to the airport beyond the formal record. For every image of a visiting dignitary, there were also countless, quieter stories. Stories of controllers in the tower, stories of aircrew, planners, engineers, ground staff, and support teams. Stories of discipline, camaraderie, routine, and professionalism. These human stories are inseparable from the physical setting in which they unfolded. From the runway, the aprons, the terminal, and above all the control tower, the structure that once watched over every movement on the airfield. That tower was more than concrete and glass. It was a vantage point of responsibility, a place of watchfulness, a place where coordination, judgment, and trust had to be exercised, often quietly and without recognition. For many who pass through Paya Lebar in one role or another, such places are remembered not only as infrastructure, but as part of life itself. That is why the legacy of Paya Lebar cannot be reduced to buildings alone. It lives also in memory, in shared experience, in professional identity, and in the human bonds formed through service and duty. For the public today, this is an essential part of heritage, because what is worth preserving is not only the visible structure, but the meaning carried within it. And it is precisely these lived human stories that make Paya Lebar more than a historical site. They make it a living legacy. As we conclude Episode 4, we return to the deeper purpose of this entire series. To remember is important, but to carry meaning forward is even more important. The story of Paya Lebar Airport does not end with diplomatic arrivals, state visits, control towers, or historical transition. It continues in what the site can still teach, in what it can still symbolize, and in how its legacy can still be activated for the public good. That is where Le Premier Base enters the story. Not as a retreat into nostalgia, but as a platform for bringing aviation heritage forward into the Gen 5 era. Through Gen 5 flight simulation, the public can encounter aviation not only as history, but as lived experience. Through 5G connectivity and XR/AR immersive systems, heritage can become participatory, educational, and accessible to future generations. Through Gen 5 AI robotics governance, the lessons of discipline, safety, and operational responsibility can be translated into a world increasingly shaped by intelligent systems. And above the widely discussed 5-layer AI stack associated with Jensen Huang, La Premiere Base proposes a further layer, Gen 5 Layer 6 Safety and Human Governance. That additional layer asks a vital question for our time. As systems become more powerful, more connected, and more autonomous, who remains responsible? The answer must still be the human being. Not human judgment displaced by technology, but human judgment strengthened, guided, supervised, and held accountable through technology. This is not a theoretical proposition alone. It has already been structured and submitted through the National White Paper and Addenda series for high-level national review, including Addendum 7 on GEN5 AI 5G XR AI robotics governance, war reserve capability integration, and deployment architecture. That addendum highlights the growing global transition from software-based AI toward embodied AI, robotics, autonomous systems, and human-supervised cyber-physical operations, and the need for a control tower approach anchored in safety, certification, supervision, auditability, and human judgment. It also sets out the national urgency for serious consideration by the National AI Council and related institutions, so that Singapore's future AI architecture does not remain software-centric, but evolves towards safe, real-world deployment governance. And importantly, it highlights a sovereign IP imperative that Gen 5 Layer 6 safety and human governance architecture deserves timely consideration for international trademark and patent priority, including through national-level review and appropriate filing pathways. That is why the legacy of Paya Lebar Airport remains relevant. For what this airport represented, discipline, readiness, control, protocol, national confidence, and strategic foresight are precisely the values that must accompany the technologies of the future. In that sense, La Premiere Base is not only about preserving what was, it is about preparing what must come next. A living bridge between aviation heritage and future capability, between memory and learning, between infrastructure and human governance, and between Singapore's past achievements and the responsibilities of its future. This is why historic Paya Lebar Airport still matters, not only as a site of history, but as a foundation for lifelong learning, experiential national education, total defense, safety, human governance, and sovereign future readiness in the years ahead.